Greetings and welcome to Rice TVX. I'm your host, Rice, and on today's show, I am joined by Jake Angeli-Chansley, otherwise known as the Q Shaman or the QAnon Shaman by the Mockingbird media. I invited Jake on so that we can learn more about him, shamanism, what actually occurred on that fateful day in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, to talk about his newly announced run for Congress in Arizona, and much more. Now, before we begin, I do want to apologize in advance for my sound. When I interview people like Jake, I generally run into technical problems, and this time was no exception. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me on today's show is a very special guest. I am joined by Jake Angeli-Chansley. Some people might know him as the Q Shaman, the QAnon Shaman, but that is a straw man that was created to control the narrative and to ruin this man's public image. Jake, welcome to the show. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Well, honestly, man, I really appreciate you accepting the invitation to come on the show. Ever since what happened on January 6th, I've been kind of following your story. You kind of became a poster child for that whole January 6th insurrection, whatever the Mockingbird media wanted to call it. And as most of my viewers might know, I was actually in D.C. on January 6th. I wasn't involved with being inside the Capitol. I actually wasn't really right there at the Capitol when it looked like people were going in. I was on the street. I had already went up that direction, checked out everything. It was just so many people, and I'm not a huge fan of like big, huge crowds. And that was a huge crowd. And I definitely want to kind of get your perspective about why you went, how everything got, situated and what occurred. But before we kind of do all that, do you mind, in your words, explain who Jake Angeli-Chansley is? And I mean, besides the fact of, and let me get this pulled up, because our website by the name of Wikipedia likes to put out a bunch of misinformation. I'm sure you're a big fan of what Wikipedia has written about you. They're calling you an alt-right conspiracy theorist and activist to participate in the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol, for which he was convicted of a felony charges of obstructing an official proceeding. He's a former supporter of Donald Trump and a believer and disseminator of the QAnon conspiracy theory. I look at you as an American shaman, an author, a political activist, and now a libertarian congressional candidate, which we'll get into because I want to try to keep this interview as linear and in the realm of the space of time as possible. So in your words, who are you?
I'm a piece of the universe that understands itself.
That's a good answer. Are you this QAnon shaman, Q shaman that the Mockingbird media has made you out to be?
No, the Mockingbird media used my image to create a straw man, and that straw man was then used to vilify and demonize what it is that I have to bring to the public as a conspiracy theorist or an alt-right extremist perspective, when neither of the two is the case whatsoever.
No, and I agree, man. If people take the time to listen to like what you have to say, I think people will get a completely different perspective on you. And with that even being said, the picture that the Mockingbird media was putting out, the Ministry of Truth was presenting to the general public, painted you in a negative light. But then that footage came out on Tucker Carlson's show, which showed you being escorted by the police. And I want to get into all that. But when I ask, like, who are you prior to what happened that day in DC? I know that you were in the Navy from 2005 to 2007. You were ultimately dismissed for refusing to take the anthrax vaccine, which I respect. So you were basically refusing vaccines before it became popular, I guess, to refuse vaccines. So this isn't a new thing to you. You've written some books that came out prior to that date in 2021. And I do want to put this interview out on YouTube. So I got to be sort of careful about what can and can't be said, but I'll do what I have to do in the edit if that's what we need to do. Otherwise, I'll just put this thing out on Rumble as a uncensored conversation. So we'll just see how it goes. But tell me about you after you left the Navy, before that day in DC. Like, who is this guy, Jake Angeli-Chansley, besides this entity that knows itself?
Well, I've always been very spiritual and conscious of myself, and, you know, always had deep questions ever since I was a child. So that kind of led me to discover and seek the truth about existence, reality, who God is, what God is, where God is, why God is, why the world is so screwed up if God is real and God exists, and how we can fix it with God at our side and, you know, behind us, with God in our hearts and our minds. I started out as there's my website, ForbiddenTruthAcademy.com.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do a little promo while you're talking to kind of show everybody a little bit of what's going on. And those will all be linked down below in the video description as well.
Cool. So I grew up in a household that was very conservative. My dad used to listen to Rush Limbaugh a lot. We would watch Fox News, etc. And for the longest time, I was a Bush supporter of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that stuff. And then my grandfather showed me a documentary about 9/11 and all the questions and how it is that the official narrative of 9/11 just did not add up. And that really kind of blew my mind and created a cognitive dissonance that changed the landscape of my political opinion forever. So after that experience, I started to question everything in the political realm. And I also had a number of spiritual experiences, both before, during, and after that cognitive dissonance, that helped to reinforce the notion that we're living in an illusion based on social constructs. And those social constructs are largely manufactured through propaganda and through neuro-linguistic programming. So after I got out of the Navy, I held a number of odd jobs and realized that I didn't like any of them. I felt like I was wasting my time and my energy. So around the age of 25, I realized that I wanted to have a positive impact on future generations. I started working with children in group homes, teen boys in particular, many of them fresh out of the juvenile correction facilities. Many of them were also brought into the system through parental abuse or neglect or something like that. Then I also started doing a lot of research, and that's where like my book comes in, or both books. I wrote my first book, Will and Power Inside the Living Library, is kind of like a conglomeration of all of my shamanic experiences and the wisdom that I had been given during my shamanic voyages and during my shamanic explorations. And so I wrote it under the pen name Lone Wolf, LOANWOLF, because it's factored into the actual fictional book itself. I'm going to do a series. So it was the first book of a 8 or 9 book series. I've got the second book written already, but I need an editor. So anyway.
Well, if anybody who's watching this happens to be a book editor, you can reach out to Mr. Chansley or Mr. Angeli-Chansley, and he can let you know whether or not you can send some contributions, some information if you want to apply.
Yeah, and just for the record, it's Angeli.
Angeli, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. A lot of people say Angeli. It's Angeli. But anyway, So I wrote that book. It took me over a year to get it done and to write it and get it finalized and published. Then shortly thereafter, I started working on the nonfiction book. That is One Mind at a Time, A Deep State of Illusion by Jake Angeli. You can find that on my website. You can also find it on Amazon. That book right there is some pretty mind-blowing stuff. It's 150 pages that basically reveals exactly what the deep state is, how it operates, where it started, how long it's been going on, all the different moving parts within what JFK called the tightly knit, highly efficient machine that we're calling the deep state. And that book right there really helped me to fathom and grasp the totality of the machine that we're dealing with and the levels of corruption that exist within the system. Shortly after I wrote that book in 2017, I started becoming more of a spiritual activist than a political one. See, I believe that our socioeconomic and geopolitical systems are so corrupted and distorted because our spiritual perspective, our spiritual systems have become so corrupted and so distorted. So if we can correct the spiritual, then the socioeconomic and geopolitical will mirror that correction. That's why I consider myself more of a spiritual activist. I was going down to the Arizona State Capitol all by myself, banging on my drums, singing my shamanic song, and giving speeches for maybe an hour or two down at the Arizona State Capitol while congressmen and, you know, the governor and stuff were in those buildings. So it was a long and interesting road before January 6th, and it was filled with mystical experiences, miraculous occurrences, very real evidence for me personally that not only is God real, but God cares about us as individuals and as a species. And because of that, I chose to continue to go down this road knowing that God was with me. Though I may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So I eventually published my book in 2020, The One Mind at a Time, A Deep State of Illusion. I waited so long because some of the book material is just so paradigm shattering. Some of it's pretty disturbing, and I wasn't 100% sure that everybody was ready to read it. Even if I wasn't going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, it really didn't matter to me. Putting that book out there was a big deal for me personally and for people in the United States and all around the planet, because, dude, when you read it, you'll understand that some of it's pretty disturbing. Some of it's pretty revealing. Some of it really is, it's necessary for people to understand, but it's, like I said, paradigm shattering, and it creates cognitive dissonance, and not everybody's ready to have that.
If it's kind of going back to like Canaanite type roots, Sumeria, Sumer, that kind of stuff, Babylon, and kind of proceeding outward, I know exactly like where you're at. And that's why I was telling you before we started recording, once we get past this initial interview, I would love to have more conversations, because you're a really interesting guy and you've got a really insightful way of looking at things. And I would like to learn more about that and explore a bunch of different areas of things that I've heard you say and talk about that I don't know that we're going to have 100% chance to cover today. So it sounds like you've kind of been in this space doing something as far as activism and fighting for freedom prior to that fateful day in 2021, January.
Dude, I've been dressing that way for over 10 years. I've been a spiritual activist dressing that way for over 10 years. I was going down to Mill Avenue in Tempe, which is right near ASU, trying to get people to wake up from the fact that they're being indoctrinated and destroying their own ecosystems, their food supply, their water supply, getting them to understand the corruption in the government and stuff like that. Since I think 2010 like 2010, 2011, something like that. I've been dressing that way.
So why did you choose to, not specifically just in DC, but ultimately in DC, but why did you choose to wear the headdress, have the staff in DC, painting your face kind of almost war paint with the red, white, and blue, having a American flag on a spear or a staff. I'm not sure exactly which one it is because I'm not sure what the media reported that was correct. But why did you choose to appear the way that you appear ultimately, whether or not in DC or prior to?
Well, it's shamanic regalia. So in the shamanic tradition, dressing that way is akin to dressing in priestly robes. And I largely take from the Hioka tradition of shamanism. The Hioka tend to do things kind of backwards as a means of helping people to understand that the reality that they live in is a social construct, a cultural construct, a cultural paradigm. And so, for example, the Hioka, if you say hello, they will say goodbye. If you say good morning, they will say good night. If they'll ride their horse backwards, they'll walk backwards through the teepees in the village. And then a lot of the time, and this isn't just a Native American tradition, but all throughout shamanic cultures around the world, the shaman usually lives on the outskirts of the tribe, and they watch the tribe. And whenever the tribe kind of reaches a crossroads, the shaman will then counsel and say, look, what you guys are thinking is reality isn't really reality. So the regalia ends up creating a shock to the cognitive system. And then through that shock to the cognitive system, the cultural paradigm can be dissolved once the shaman is then able to relay the truth about objective reality to the individual once that cultural paradigm shock has been delivered. So in that way, I was taking from the Hioka shaman tradition, where the image creates a shock to the cognitive system. People come up and they converse with me, and then I plant the seeds of truth that allow them to see reality differently.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It totally does, and I appreciate you explaining it that way. Why did you what about shamanism? Well, let me try to rephrase this correctly. What was it about shamanism that was so attractive to you, and what exactly is shamanism to you?
Well, let's start with the definition for shaman. It is an anthropological term that is taken from the Siberian or Mongolian tradition. Shaman simply means the one who knows. So it's like a medicine man, basically, or medicine woman. To be a shaman, you don't have to be a man. You can also be a woman. And it just means the one who knows. Now, in my study of all religions, because I wanted to know who God was, what God was, where God was, why God was, I looked to all religions to see, okay, well, what's their thing? What are they saying? What is their belief? Why do they believe what they believe? How does this relate to this religion or that cultural tradition or whatever? And what I came to find is that shamanism is at the roots of all religious traditions. If you think about it, in all shamanic cultures all over the country, all over the world, it doesn't matter what exactly the language or the tongue they speak, they believe in several key foundational factors. Number one, the belief in God or a unified field or a unified life force. Number two, they believe in a spirit world where there are positive and negative entities, demonic or angelic entities. And number three, they believe that in the power of healing, okay, and this idea of creating healing, whether it be through plant medicines or sound and song or frequencies, etc. They also believe that if they ally themselves with some of these angelic spirits, they can get and ally themselves with God, then they can create or facilitate this healing much more rapidly. They also believe in song and dance, music, and singing, and the role that these things play, the vibrations, the traditional healing songs and stuff like that, and how that can end up allowing them to get into like trance states, which allow them to get in contact with the spirit world, which allow them to get in contact with God and the angels, etc., so that healing can be facilitated, or so that they can ward off evil spirits from the ecosystem, exorcise evil spirits from people's bodies, etc. They also all believe in sacraments and like this idea of healing plants or sacramental plants that allow them to get in touch with the spirit world, allow them to get in touch with God, etc. They also all believe in one way or another in ordeals and going through prolonged ordeals that are challenging to the physical system, that are challenging to the body. And in doing so, this also creates these altered states of consciousness that allow them to transcend the physical and immerse themselves in the spiritual objective reality that we all live in. But most people, their brain just filters it out. They also all believe in meditation and prayer, you see. So through meditation and prayer or trance states, they can, or singing or dancing or drumming, through things like ordeals or fasting or what have you, they can get in touch and in tune with God, get in touch with the spirit world, dissolve the cultural paradigms, observe reality objectively, and expand their consciousness, expand their awareness and understanding of the truth about reality and life itself, and their role in it for that matter. So if you look at all religions, well, they all have their own little versions of that, don't they? They all have their
based off what you
sacraments.
described, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So my thinking was like, okay, well, I want to go to the root. I want to go to the source. I don't want some institution to do my thinking for me and give me some dogmatic pattern of thought that I have to religiously obey. I would much rather go to the source and experience these divine things for myself. I would much rather go to the source and have an experience of reality that goes beyond the use of words. And that's largely what dogma is it's words to neurolinguistically program people's minds to perceive reality through a cultural or religious paradigm. And I don't want that at all. I want the real, raw thing as it is for itself, so that I can know the answers to the questions that have been on my mind since I was a child.
And I like the way you explain that. I mean, and I've noticed in listening to you talk that when you talk about spirituality, you'll use examples from what people would consider to be religions as ways that these incorporate. Because you've talked a lot about Christ, who you think Christ is. I think you've talked about the ideas of like what you kind of describe in some ways reminds me of Buddhism. So it kind of sounds like you're kind of looking at all these different religions and seeing them as being basically the same thing, just different variations, and in using these examples as ways to be able to connect with people, because people connect themselves in tribal ways, and religion's a big way of causing that tribalness.
Different tongues, same truth. The light is one, the paths are many. Now, that will set many people's heads on fire, because they're like, oh no, the Bible says Jesus is the only way, and it's like, look, dude, I'm just telling you right now, Jesus was like the ultimate shaman. I walk in the path of Christ's footsteps. I'm like a disciple of Christ. So don't go throwing this whole, oh, you're practicing Satanism and Luciferianism, you're in the occult. It's like, no, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. You do not know of what you speak. And I understand why you're in this mode that you're in, but you are uninformed, you are misinformed, and you are coming to a conclusion about a person and a belief system that you do not fully understand and have not fully vetted or listened to.
Well said. And this is an area of topic that I would like to dive more into in the future without taking away from this conversation, because I think we could just have a conversation just based off of what you were talking about, explaining about what shamanism is to you. Let's fast forward to around the time period of January 6th. I went there. I'm not necessarily a supporter of any politician. My saying kind of goes like almost a uniparty thing. It's right wing, left wing, same bird, same brain. You got two wings on a bird, but it's controlled by the same brain. So it's hard for me to take a lot of these individuals serious. I don't consider myself to be on January 6th. I didn't go to DC because of Donald Trump. I went there because I really wanted to experience the patriotism of people caring about our country and wanting to see positive change, which was so overwhelming. I mean, for months trying to describe what I experienced just by being in DC that day was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever experienced. And it really, truly kind of relit that hope inside of me that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that we can get enough people to get on board and make change. And when everything was going on at the Capitol with people breaking in or whatever the situation might have been that the Mockingbird media was saying or calling it, I heard people out on the streets, like a bunch of Christian groups, teenager groups, variety of ages, all singing songs like kind of kumbaya, very positive. And then somebody was messaging me on social media telling me what was happening. From your perspective, why did you, well, I guess before I ask why, had you ever gone to any sort of Trump rally or anything like that prior to January 6th?
Yeah, I went to pretty much every single Trump rally that was here in Arizona, dressed in my regalia.
Okay. So what was your ultimate, like, why did you decide to go to DC on January 6th? What were your goals and your purpose?
Well, I also went to the second Mega Million March on December 12th in 2020 in my regalia. Everything
12.
was peaceful. Everything was fine. I was expecting more of the same on January 6th. You know, my motivations for going on both December 12th and January 6th were the same, largely spiritual. Washington, D.C. is built on electromagnetic ley lines. And all of the monuments, all of the capitals, all of the buildings, the Capitol, the White House, the Supreme Court, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, all of them are built on electromagnetic ley lines, the Pentagon. And so if there's going to be a million people or more assembled on the electromagnetic ley lines of the nation's capital, then I felt it my shamanic duty to be there and ensure that the highest possible vibrations of love and peace and harmony were plugged into the sacred ley lines, the sacred space that is our capital. And so that was largely my motivation for going, dispelling evil, making sure the positive vibrations were present, peace was maintained, harmony, etc. But there's also political reasons because, dude, and this is just me, but I think that this sentiment is, also shared by a lot of people that went. There has been a long string of abuses that have taken place from this government to the American people. We can start with the Federal Reserve. We can start with
taxation of labor, IRS. Yeah, the list goes on.
Well, and dude, but now we can also get into JFK's assassination, the propaganda campaign that unfolded, the term conspiracy theorist. I mean, they literally capped a sitting president in broad daylight on live television and then brushed it under the rug. And that sent a message to everybody that was thinking about rocking the boat then and now that this is the level of power that we're dealing with. So it's also about things like, Waco, Oklahoma City, 9/11, Boston bombing, the Vegas shooting, the school shootings, the Russia for 4 years, Benghazi, 33,000 emails, no prosecution whatsoever. The money that's missing from the Pentagon and the defense budget. Then we can also get into the lies the media has been telling. Like I said, Russia, no retraction, no justice, no prosecutions, no nothing. And then there's also COVID and the lockdowns. Everybody being told they're not essential. They have to stay home. The lives that were ruined there. The BLM and Antifa riots. 90 to 95% of the federal charges just dropped. Okay. And then you've also got things like these leaders, these Democrat talking heads, trying to get these people out of jail and get them back on the streets to riot. You've got then you got the Hunter Biden laptop suppression. And then you got the election interference and the rigging of the system. And so to me, it's like, okay, dude, you guys, have been consolidating power for far too long. You've been centralizing power. You've been robbing us blind and using that money to pay for the American people are paying for their own enslavement, you know? So to me, it's like, all right,
too.
What would the founders do? The founders of our country are rolling around in their graves right now because they're like, dude, no, they would have taken a stand a long time ago. But I do believe that violent revolution is not the answer. What we need is nonviolent evolution. We need non-compliance, non-violent, non-cooperation with evil. And non-compliance suffocates tyranny.
Yeah. No,
so that's my reasons. That's my reasons for going.
And those are all beautiful reasons. Those are all beautiful reasons. Now, from a spiritual standpoint, from a shamanic standpoint, does that completely coincide with why you went? Was there any other spirit? Like, did you have? Because it sounded like you were going there as a shaman to do some sort of shamanic service to humanity, whether it was the people there, talking about the energy, talking about the ley lines and things to that effect. Because I think as we talk about you getting arrested, you getting released, I think this will become a lot more relevant, because I've been trying to read between the lines of your situation, like as far as like the police escorting you around, which we'll get to, because I want to keep that in a linear time. But from a shamanic standpoint, what was your purpose there?
Well, it's about cleansing the ley lines and the ether. It's about transforming the vortexes from low frequency to high frequency, cleansing the negativity. So, for example, on December 12th, I walked from behind the Capitol all the way down past and around the Washington Monument down to the Lincoln Memorial, okay? And all the while I was banging my drum and screaming freedom. And I can get really, really loud, okay? I'm like a megaphone in and of myself. And the sound of my banging my drum and screaming freedom echoed all throughout that area, dude. It could be heard for at least a mile or two, okay? And what you got to understand about sound and singing and all that stuff is that your intention is a part of it. And also sound ends up transforming and reshaping the spin of quantum particles. It affects the electromagnetics of the area around you and on the ley lines. So by creating that sound and screaming freedom and banging my drum, it was like chasing off the evil. It was like cleansing the area and the ley lines. Now, what's really interesting about that is that shamans have been doing that for thousands of years. And they do that as a means of using sound to affect the quantum entangled universe, to affect the ley lines and the sacred sites. That's why they built medicine wheels on the ley lines. And that's also why they healed people on the ley lines. But I digress.
Is that all cymatic related? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is this all cymatic basically? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It's all based on cymatics and the certain patterns and sounds and frequencies and harmonics and stuff like that. So we're living in a system that is that it's not harmonic at all. It's out of harmony with the ecosystem. It's out of harmony with humanity. It's out of harmony with the natural flow of energy within the ecosystem, within the earth, etc. And so by going to DC and doing that, I ended up using the opportunity to cleanse the ecosystem. Interesting enough, in shamanism, they understand that sometimes it takes, 24, 48, 72 hours or so for the full effects of these vibrations to move through the electromagnetic interconnected web of reality itself, of the quantum and cosmic hologram. So I got home after the December 12th Maga Million March, after doing that singing ceremony, and I found it on my phone. It said that DC, New York, Maryland, all that area had been hit by one of the largest snowstorms in their history. And this is a part of shamanism where you call the rain to cleanse the ecosystem. You call in the elements. You are the elements. You are the elements. So you use the quantum entangled nature to the elements your body is made up of to have an effect on the quantum entangled universe and cleanse evil. And then so in one way or another, I viewed my entry into the Capitol and my more so my singing in the upper terrace of the Senate chamber as an opportunity to sing my shamanic song in that sacred space on the ley lines. You see, cleansing the chamber of evil spirits, cleansing the chamber of negative vibrations. Interestingly enough, one of the most iconic shots that traveled around the world was at the climax of me singing my shamanic song.
What was that?
The one, the close-up shot of my face in the horns and face paint.
Okay.
Where it looks like I'm screaming. I'm not screaming, I'm singing. But it's like the climax of my shamanic song.
All right. I think I know which picture. I mean, there's so many pictures of you that they've used as this icon, poster child of what took place on January 6th. Speaking of that, why do you think that they made you specifically the poster child? Why do you think that they created this straw man, this QAnon shaman? I know that you mentioned it was Alex Jones that came up with Q shaman, and then the media kind of took it further with the QAnon shaman. I don't think, and I'm pretty sure you don't think that Alex Jones meant anything by that, but I also take a lot of what Alex Jones says with a grain of salt as well. But why do you think that they used you in particular? And if I'm not mistaken, I think you were the first individual that was indicted on anything related to January 6th.
Yes. So the Mockingbird media and the intelligence community had a lot of shocking images from outside the building. But what happened inside was largely the exact opposite of what happened outside. So what happened inside and what happened outside are drastically different. What happened inside was largely peaceful, mostly peaceful. People walking around, basically looking like they're taking a tour. We've seen some of these videos where people are fist bumping cops or shaking hands or what have you. Police are just sitting there, talking to each other while people are walking through the halls, Now, they needed an image from inside the building that was equally shocking to what happened outside the building. They could not really find that. So they used my image in combination with the images from the outside to create the appearance of the violent insurrection that took place, which, by the way, nobody in the January 6th indictments has been charged with insurrection. So this notion of a violent insurrection is absolutely ludicrous. Nobody's been charged with insurrection. So that being the case, they had to use my image to create the illusion of there being a certain level of chaos inside the building the way that there was outside. So by pairing the two together, they married my image with the images that were outside. And then in that way, they correlated my image with what happened outside and were able to craft their narrative based on this shock and awe campaign that they had, obviously come to some sort of a plan and some sort of a strategy of how they wanted to roll it out.
Right. Which makes sense. It does. But when you think about it in retrospect, the powers that be, the Nancy Pelosi, the Democrats, the people at the January 6th hearing, they had to be aware that there was footage that showed the complete opposite, which doesn't make sense that they would make you out to be this poster child of, in a sense, rebellion and violence, when inside the Capitol it was nothing. Like I was just showing, you were literally being escorted around by the police, which I do want to kind of get into that in just a minute. It seems like they could have chose different individuals. I guess your look was so iconic. Without getting into too much details, one thing that I was curious about from your position was, and I don't know that you've answered this in any sense or people have asked you in any interviews, but did you have any sort of relationship with Ray Epps prior to January 6th or the day of? Because I noticed, doing some research, he He ultimately moved to Utah in May of 2022, but he was living in Queen Creek, Arizona, which is roughly 40 minutes from the Phoenix area, which I think you're from the Phoenix area.
I'm from North Phoenix, so it's at least an hour.
Okay.
I
was just
had
curious.
no relationship whatsoever. I didn't even know who he was until after all that stuff happened, and I saw him in his face in the media and the questions about him. No, I have no relationship to him. Didn't even know who he was.
Okay. I appreciate you answering that. And to kind of go on to the next part here, I don't know why I took that full screen. You made a lot of interesting publications. This was from Time Magazine. The real reason the January 6th QAnon Shaman was released from prison early, which it really doesn't state a reason. Ultimately, going back to my notes, you pled guilty September 2021 to one felony count of obstruction of an official proceeding. You were sentenced to 41 months. That took place November 17, 2021. You served 27 months of your 41-month sentence. You were released early. You said it had nothing to do with the Tucker Carlson footage, but that came out, I think, just a few weeks prior to you're being released. Before we go into like your lawyer filing a motion and when you were arrested, where was I getting at with this question? I apologize.
Well, I can tell you what reason why.
Well, what was the reason in these articles of why you were released? Because it talks about the
First
Bureau
Step
of Prisons, First Step Act, and all that kind of stuff. And then, so I'm curious what that was. And then I want to kind of separate that as much as possible from your lawyer filing that motion to vacate.
Okay. So in federal prison, you only serve 85% of your time, assuming you don't get in any trouble while in prison. So 15% of 41 months is 6 months, right? So I already had 6 months worth of good time, what's called good time, accumulated because I didn't get in any trouble while I was in prison. Then I was in the RDAP residential drug abuse program. They put me in there because the BOP said that when I was honest with the pre-sentence investigator that asked me if I had ever done hallucinogens, I told him, yeah, I've eaten mushrooms a handful of times in my life. And they're like, and so the BOP decided that that was enough of a reason to demand that I do RDAP, which is fine. The way I looked at it was I'm getting FSA credits, First Step Act credits by doing RDAP. You see, and I can also do some good by helping people that actually have real drug abuse problems. I was a very active member in trying to help individuals in the RDAP community. So I was moved into the RDAP facility in February of 2022. And I completed RDAP in February of 2023. So that means I had accumulated a year's worth of FSA credits, which means that I would get 6 months off of my sentence. And so the 6 months of FSA credits plus the 6 months of good time got me a year off of my sentence. I was released to the halfway house 2 months before my sentence would be over with that year taken off. I had my release date in mid-February of 2023 after I completed RDAP. And it just so happened to be divine providence, the will of God, that Tucker Carlson got a hold of that footage and released it 3 weeks before my release. Now, this is really important to understand, though. Tucker Carlson's choice to air that footage was vital to my vindication in the court of public opinion. Not necessarily in the federal court, but in the court of public opinion, because the Mockingbird media painted me in such a way that they made me look like some lunatic, when clearly I'm being escorted around the building by the police. Do you want to know why? I can't hear you.
It's because I had myself muted, and I apologize. Yes, this is something I definitely want to know the answer to, because I told you I had saw the interview that you did with Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire, and at the time you really couldn't speak about it, and I was kind of reading between the lines, which made it seem like before you answer, that the police were escorting you because you were there to do spiritual work, and they respected that. I may be wrong, but that's my thoughts. But you just muted yourself.
That's no, really what it is that I offered to help them. When I went into the upper terrace to sing my shamanic song, I saw there were people in the chamber, in the Senate chamber, and I walked up to the police and I said, hey, guess what? There's people in the Senate chamber right now. And if you want, I can go down there and help you guys make sure there's no vandalism or theft or violence, and help you clear the room if you want. And they saw my megaphone and they were like, yeah, come on, let's go. So that's why we were walking around looking for an open door. We were walking around from locked door to locked door because we were looking for an entry into the Senate chamber so that I could help them make sure there's no vandalism, theft, violence, and I could help them clear the room. Now, why
was this footage so conveniently not given to your defense attorneys during discovery, and why was it released via someone like Tucker Carlson and not even the police that escorted you coming to your aid in your case? I'm curious about that.
Well, here's the part right here where they snap the shot. See where I'm yelling right there? That's where they snap the shot.
But that's where you're singing.
Climax of my shamanic song. Yeah, right there. That's where they snapped it. Anyway, I find it very difficult to believe that they did not see that footage that was released on Tucker Carlson, whether it be the FBI or the prosecution or the January 6th committee. And the reason why I find it difficult to believe is this. Number one, I told the FBI that the police were escorting me around the building because I offered to help them. So it is actually technically their job to investigate all of my story, to see if there's inconsistencies, to see if I'm lying or not. And it's not like I'm hard to spot in the footage. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Where's Waldo's?
You're very easy to find.
Yeah,
I think you're probably the easiest person to find there, honestly.
Right. So it's their job to investigate my story. So they should have investigated all of it. They even used some of the CCTV footage in the discovery that they gave me and at the sentencing and at the guilty plea hearing, if I'm not mistaken. Definitely at the sentencing. So the idea that they didn't know, I don't buy it, number one. Number two, the January 6th committee used my image several times throughout their propaganda campaign, right? So are you telling me that they didn't comb over all of the footage to find any and all damning evidence of the person that they chose to be the poster child, the poster boy of their smear campaign and their propaganda? No, they combed over everything because they were going to look for anything and everything to make me look as bad and make the whole thing inside the building look as bad as possible. I think that they knew and chose not to place it into their propaganda because then it would dissolve their narrative. And I also think that goes for the government. Now, here's the thing. And this is part of the reason why the motion was filed.
No, real quick. Let me pause you real quick because so people are understanding. Your lawyer filed a motion to vacate your conviction and your sentence due to that footage not being in your discovery given to your previous defense attorney, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, and so the motion to vacate the conviction and sentence was based on what's called a 2255 ineffective assistance of counsel. In other words, we didn't have all of the evidence that we should have had, and therefore my lawyer was ineffective in his negotiation with the prosecution and the sentencing.
That makes sense. Now what has happened since with that motion to vacate?
Well, allow me to explain why it is that we chose to file it in the first place, because it was kind of a long shot that my conviction would be vacated and my sentence vacated. But the reason why was because, look at it like this. The way that this stuff is supposed to work is the government is supposed to find evidence of a crime. They do an investigation, they make an arrest, and they file charges. Okay. Now, I was one of the first people arrested because when the FBI was looking for me, I called them. I heard you were looking for me. Let's talk. You guys want information on me. Might as well just get it from me. What's up? You know,
Right.
we ended up conversing over the phone for almost an hour, where I red pilled the FBI agent. And then we ended up setting up a time for me to meet at the Phoenix field office for the FBI. I went in on January 9th. The guy said he wasn't going to arrest me. I told him I'd show up even if he was. I just wanted to know. He said, we're not going to arrest you. They lied to me. They arrested me. And then I wasn't given a pre-trial release. I was detained. And so what happened is that they made an arrest. They made an arrest. They filed charges. Then they did their investigation. And in the process, assuming no malfeasance was taking place, and we'll just say for the sake of argument, no malfeasance took place. No prosecutorial misconduct, no investigative suppression or whatever. What happened is that because there was so much footage, they did not comb through all of it in their investigation. And in the process, they did not hand over all of the evidence, both criminalizing and exculpatory. They did not hand over all the evidence to the defense. And I'm not the only one that this happened to. So according to the prosecution, at some time, I believe it was in October, they made that footage available to my previous attorney, Albert Watkins, by giving him and all of the J6 defense attorneys access to a link where 44,000 hours of footage could be viewed.
Wow.
Okay, so basically it's like, look, we've accumulated all this damning evidence against your client. Now, here's 44,000 hours of footage. Find your client, find the needle in the haystack, find the exculpatory evidence. And that is wrong. That's not the way the system is supposed to function. They're supposed to comb through all of the evidence and give the defense all of the evidence that they have. And this is where they kind of blurred the lines here, when they gave all the defense attorneys this 44,000 hours of footage and said, find your client. So the amount of money and time that it would take for these defense attorneys to do that, to not just find their client, but then trace their client's steps all throughout the Capitol. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would be astronomical. And the amount of money that would be charged to these J6er defendants, and the amount of time that would be consumed by the defense attorneys would be, it's just completely unreasonable. So the motion was as much for me as it was for everybody else that is a J6er that also went through this, where they were arrested, they had charges filed, then the government did their investigation. How many other people had evidence slip and fall through the cracks? Because the government's not doing what it's supposed to do. You know?
Well, but you're right. But if they would have provided that information, then there really wouldn't have been a case. So it wouldn't have allowed for them to paint their narrative the way that they did. And like you said, nobody has been charged with any sort of crime of insurrection. Not one individual. Well, I don't even think Donald Trump with his stuff has any.
No, they're getting
charges.
him. They're getting him on conspiracy, a seditious conspiracy. That's what they're trying to get him on, not insurrection.
Right.
And it's because a conspiracy charge is actually relatively easy to get a conviction on. This is something I learned in prison. So the conspiracy charge was invented and created to go after the mob. Okay. So the conspiracy charge is basically where you don't have to have any direct evidence
The RICO
of a
stuff.
crime being committed. All you really need is two witnesses that are willing to take the stand and say, yeah, that's the guy. He said this, he did that, he brought me this, he brought me that, this is how much I paid or whatever. And then they can get you on conspiracy, which is essentially like the idea. It's like you didn't commit a crime, you were thinking about, you were talking about committing a crime. You were in a conspiracy, which if you think about all the people that have been tried and convicted or taken a plea deal for a conspiracy charge from the government is the biggest believer in conspiracy theories.
Yeah, because a lot of this stuff ends up coming out as being FBI files that were released later after a certain amount of time and such. Yeah, I mean, that's why it's hard. I mean, it's hard for me to as much as I want to be patriotic to America, it's hard for me to trust the government for obvious reasons. You mentioned 44,000 hours footage that was released all at the same time to the attorneys. This, I guess, would be the same footage that was just recently released by the Speaker of the House.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing, though. From what I understand, they did not release all 44,000 hours. They've released it in chunks. And the thing is, dude, they're not, from what I understand, I could be mistaken, but from what I understand, they're not releasing the body cam footage.
Okay, so yeah, that's one thing. When I reached out to you about doing the interview, I still haven't had a chance to go through the footage, and it's obviously 44,000 hours of footage. It's not something I'm going to be able to review in a couple of days before interviewing you, but I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on it. So this makes sense, because I was trying to find some of it, and it, like you're saying, it just seems to be pieces. I saw two things this morning. We're recording this on the 21st of November. I saw two things this morning, one of which was Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer talking to Pence at the time, where they were talking about reconvening, and I think they filmed it twice because I guess they didn't get the right reaction that they wanted from everybody the first time. So it's showing our politicians as actually being actors, and then showing where the police at the actual Capitol were doing a great job keeping people at kind of bay and not coming forth in a certain area. And then for whatever unknown reason, those people started moving forward with the police not trying to prevent it from taking place, which kind of goes against a lot of the things that the media reported. I mean, that's one thing that I've had to explain to people going to DC that day, was what I experienced versus what I heard happened. Because it's like, I heard what happened, but I was like, I was there, and this shit that you're saying is not real. Like, even I'm pretty sure I crossed paths with some like Antifa type people, and I just did not see anything that looked violent, conspiring, seditious. I didn't think that when Donald Trump spoke that he was encouraging people to perform an insurrection. None of that made sense. But to paint this picture, they had to do this. So do you think that 44,000 hours of footage that was released to the attorneys that supposedly the Speaker of the House is going to release, do you think all that footage will eventually make its way out sooner than later?
Be perfectly honest with you, I don't know if Speaker Johnson has the balls to do it. I think that most of what we see in DC is political theater. And they strategically release some footage that would help their narrative, and they're holding back other footage. Like I said, they're apparently not releasing all the body cam footage. They haven't released all the 44,000 hours, even though they could just say, boom, dump, floodgates open, here you go, sift through it, there it is.
But that's what I thought was being done. Yeah, and that's what's confusing, is that you don't see it all being done. And when you look this up, it says he promises to release, but there's not very many articles or very much of anything that says that he actually released it. And even going back and looking at this article is saying, pulling it back up, that Matt Gaetz praises Speaker Mike Johnson for releasing 44,000 hours of Capitol riot footage, which makes it sound like 44,000 hours of footage was released, but it sounds like all 44,000 has not been released.
No,
it says
no,
they're being released in tranches. The first tranche, around 90 hours, was released to the public committee website Friday, with the rest of the 44,000 supposed to be over the next several months, is what they're saying.
Dude, it's political theater. These people do not care the way that they claim that they do. They want to appear like they care, but dude, they don't care. If they did, then they would have been doing things different a long time ago. All right. And look, like, I'm just going to say it publicly here and now because I've already put a tweet out about it. I did an interview with Newsmax on Monday of last week. In that interview, which was nationally syndicated, live television, I talked about my congressional promises, my congressional platform running for the Congress. In that, if you want to scroll down, we can find it.
That's what I'm looking for.
In that interview, I talked about yeah, isn't that great? That's awesome, yeah. Isn't it? In that interview, I talked about my campaign platform and my promises, which number 1, single bill voting law. Number 2, amendment for term limits for congressmen and staff. Number 3, criminalize lobbying. There it is right there. Go
this
up.
This one right here.
Yep, that one right there. Number 4 is 7-figure fines, expulsion, and prosecution for insider trading. Lo and behold, after I do that national interview, Matt Gaetz starts talking about a single bill voting law. Here he is. He's talking about supporting anti-corruption plan that includes a ban on congressional stock trading, 12-year term limits for Congress, and a ban on political donations from lobbyists or PACs. Interesting. So these things he is discussing, these 4 things that I'm running on, he's discussing in less than a week after I make this national campaign promise of what it is that I plan to do. Why wasn't he talking about those 4 things prior? Why wasn't he conglomerating and consolidating all of these things into one package prior to my run? This is proof that we, the people, have a voice. This is proof that also, I think, God love Matt Gaetz, but like, dude, where's the credit? And the thing is, I think credit's for losers. I really don't care about getting credit. I'd rather see these things implemented than get the credit for the one that implemented them. But dude, it's political theater. It's political theater. And it's because I was calling out Congress for not doing their dang jobs. Because if they were for the American people, they would have been talking about this stuff a long time ago. They would have already done it a long time ago. And it's the same thing with the January 6th footage. If they actually cared, then guess what they'd be doing? They'd just release all 44,000 hours. So I challenge these Congress members to stop playing games with the American people's lives. Stop playing your little political theater BS. Release all the footage. Get these bills passed into law, and I'll find something else new to run on. Believe me, I've got a long list of things that we can change in DC to change the corrupt apparatus. All right. So get those things passed. Then I'll do something else with my platform. I'd rather see these things be passed before I get into Congress so I can actually really start making real headway in the Congress than have to start from square one. And square one is single bill voting law. And the reason why is because, number 1, there's no more 2,000-page bills that people have to read in 24 hours. You can read a couple of pages, 10, 20 pages in 24 hours. Okay. Number 2, the bills after the single bill voting law will be single bill. So then we will see where it is that these politicians want to direct their funds, that they'll vote yes or no on certain bills. And we'll see, kind of like how the NASCAR people wear the people that sponsor them on their suits. We're going to start seeing who is sponsoring these politicians based on how they vote and what they vote for and against. Single bill voting, it has a number of other implications I'm not going to get into, but my point is this. It's all political theater in DC. George Carlin said it best. They don't care about you. They don't care about you. They don't care about your children. Come on, man.
I agree. I want to get into you running for Congress in more detail here in just a moment, but I have one more question in regards to the legal stuff. Really simple question. I remember in that interview with Michael Knowles, you mentioned that your property, including the headdress that you wore in DC, was in possession of law enforcement. Has that been resolved and you gotten your property back at this point?
No, and they were supposed to return it over a year ago.
Do you know what the holdup is, or are you going to try to make sure you get your original headdress back, the one with the coyote and coyote tails?
I've been trying. I suppose the government is implementing its own form of non-compliance and non-violent non-cooperation in this case.
I was just curious, man, because it's so iconic. I was just curious if you got it back. So I know that when you did that interview with Michael Knowles, that you had created, I don't know if you did it specifically for that interview, but you had created a new headdress.
Yeah, I made my own.
Okay, cool. So you made this announcement that you are going to be running for Congress in Arizona, where you're at. And let me get this article pulled up. It seems like every article that was coming out talking about this, everybody wants to obviously refer to you as the QAnon shaman and kind of paint you in a negative light. With all that being said, and knowing that they were probably going to paint you in a negative light, what made you ultimately decide to run for Congress, and why did you choose to run as a libertarian?
Because nobody in Congress is doing their dang job. That's why. Nobody's actually speaking for the American people. You know who they speak for? You know whose bidding they do? Non-government organizations, international corporations, special interest groups, and international banking cartels. That is who is funding their campaign, and that is who they are representing in the Congress. Okay? Now, the reason that I have chosen to go with the platform that I have, which is obviously the 4 things that I just delineated, but also not accepting any campaign donations. I don't want your money. What I'm asking for is your signatures to get me on the ballot and your vote to get me into office. And you know what the cool thing is about all that? It's free. Okay? So I think big money is a big problem in American politics. All right. So because big money is a big problem in American politics, I want to be the antithesis of the problems in American politics. So guess what? I don't want your money. All I'm asking for is your support, your signatures, and your vote, all of which are free. The reason why I'm running as a libertarian is because I believe I and many other Americans have become entirely disillusioned with the uniparty system, with Republicans and Democrats alike. Now, I obviously got a lot of support from Republican voters. I didn't get anywhere near as much support from Republican representatives. But case in point, the 2-party system has done nothing but divide this country and take everything from the American people. And what we have gotten in exchange for being divided and having everything taken from us is only more taxes, more headaches, more problems, more poverty, more wars, crisis after crisis after crisis, and less freedoms. So I, once again, want to be the antithesis of all the problems in American politics. I'm not going to be a Republican. I'm not going to be a Democrat, because that is part of the problem. I'm running as a libertarian because, in my opinion, it's the closest thing to the Founding Fathers model that we have in the current political sphere. But dude, even the Libertarian Party here in Arizona has basically kept me at arm's length. And this just goes to show that institutions, this is why, dude, I don't trust people. I don't trust institutions. I trust patterns. And what we have here is a pattern of corruption, a pattern of large slush funds of money based on political parties and political identities being funneled to very specific candidates that are going to keep the status quo, that are going to do the bidding of the political party and those that support the political party in the Congress, which is the non-government organizations, the special interest groups, the international banking cartel, and the international corporations. I want there to be no strings on me. That's why I'm not asking for money. That's why I'm not doing anything with any, 2-party system. And that's also why I'm not going to be running a smear campaign against any of my opponents, because that's another part of the problem. If you have the best platform, if you have the best understanding of how to affect positive change, you don't need to run a smear campaign. If you're the best, you're the best. And so you don't need to smear your opponent. That's for children. That's like schoolyard, high school, BS. It's like student council BS. And that's essentially what we have going on in modern American politics. Is it's like a high school. Okay, the political theater is like a high school. We have a bunch of grown adults acting like children in the Congress. And I'm tired of it.
Right.
And I think the American people are too.
Well, the reason I ask you about the libertarian thing is because like I told you that I interviewed John McAfee, rest in peace, before his passing, and he was running for president as a libertarian, and he, as well as Adam Kokesh, another Arizona guy who lives in Arizona that was running for president as well with the Libertarian Party. At the same time period, they ultimately teamed up at the very end before they kind of got knocked out. But the Libertarian Party has seemed to be co-opted. There's a lot of Republicans and Democrats that are posing to be libertarians, so it kind of causes a lot of dissent in the party itself. So that's why I was curious why you chose to run as a libertarian and not necessarily like as an independent per se.
Well, I had considered that. I had already registered as a libertarian, and I had been a libertarian for some time. In many of my interviews, I've told people, dude, I'm not actually a Republican. I'm a libertarian. You know, so, and it's because the libertarian foundation of small government, maximum liberty, maximum freedom is the closest thing to the founding fathers model. Independent libertarian, it really doesn't matter as far as garnering of signatures.
Yeah.
Maybe optics wise, independent would be better. There's definitely some aspects to the Libertarian Party and its past where they've been co-opted by, shall we say, not so good people that like children.
Yeah.
That I have a real issue with, but I'd also like to weed that out. I'd like to be the force that finally gets rid of that crap and that image, because I don't like pedophiles. I've seen the effects of what pedophilia does to children when I was working with kids in group homes and how much it traumatized these kids, how much it destroyed their lives. I don't like pedophiles. And I can honestly say that I think most people in America can agree with that they don't like pedophiles and they believe pedophilia is bad and pedophilia is evil.
I would think most people should agree with that statement. I mean, with the world that we live in, it seems like they're trying to make that go away, and they're trying to make people comfortable with the opposite. But that's another conversation for another day. As far as, if you don't mind repeating the 4 things that you're running on, as far as your run for Congress there in Arizona.
Single bill voting law, term limit amendment for congressmen and staff, criminalized lobbying, 7-figure fines, expulsion, and prosecution for insider trading.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Now, are you
everybody, Republican and Democrat voters alike, can agree on those things? It will literally weed out the systemic corruption in four steps. It will make it so much more difficult to centralize power, so much more difficult to corrupt the system.
No, I like the way you put that. I do. And I think that those are all good things to run on. I think that we definitely need people that I don't think are part of the political establishment. And I think that's where, like, some people were very attracted to someone like Donald Trump. And speaking of Donald Trump, because we did see in that, I think that Wikipedia, which is always factual information, right, Jake? It says that
Dude, I think the founder of Wikipedia even said that the government and the intelligence agencies co-opted their website and using it to spread misinformation. So, like, there you go.
Are you a former supporter of Donald Trump, or are you still a supporter of Donald Trump? Would you vote for him if he's the Republican candidate running this time?
If I could vote, I would vote for Donald Trump.
Oh, that's right. You got a felony charge. I'm sorry. My bad.
Well, the thing is, in Arizona, you can vote once your probation or your supervised release is over. As long as you served your sentence and paid your fines, you can vote in Arizona. But I'm still on supervised release, which means that I technically can't vote for myself as I run for Congress.
Which is crazy, but you can technically run in your position too. So it's very interesting. I did see that you could get the voting rights back after everything was completed, and you still have got, I don't know, somewhere around 30 something months left of probation ultimately.
Yes. And just to let you know, my previous attorney is the one that said that I felt duped by Donald Trump. I never said that. I never asked him to say that. He said all sorts of things on my behalf to the media that were not true and that I never asked him to say. He also even had the audacity to tell the media that I was schizophrenic, bipolar, depressed, and delusional. None of which is true. None of which was in my psychological evaluation. In fact, the antithesis of that is true, because in my psyche eval, it says I'm not being diagnosed as schizophrenic and I'm not delusional. So why he said that crap to the media, I don't know. And I'm not bipolar. I'm not depressed.
Well, I mean, I kind of look at things differently with attorneys and where they take an oath to. So maybe his oath wasn't to you, and it was to the agenda of making sure that, because I mean, to be an attorney, he has to be a member of the bar association, and maybe the bar association ultimately can say, well, ultimately we're your boss, because without having to be part of the bar association, you're not going to be an attorney or a lawyer. You're not going to be allowed to practice law, which I think is a joke in and of itself, that doctors practice medicine and lawyers practice law. It's like, who actually does medicine? Who actually does law? That would be nice to know. That would be a beautiful thing to know.
Well, notice, and this is very important to understand really quick. Law school and medical school, largely Ivy League controlled. You see, and a lot of the time, politicians come out of Ivy League as well with poli-sci degrees. So think about it. Politics, medicine, and law, all being controlled by a small handful of universities that have been infiltrated and run by communists. No wonder we're in the mess that we're in.
It's a perversion of nature, of everything natural, because even our legal system is a perversion of natural law. Whereas our medical system is a perversion of natural medicines and holistic medicines, so you get where this is where I would love to be able to have more conversations, because there's definitely I'm not going to be able to get to a lot of what I wanted to talk about, which I didn't think I was. I was just hoping you would enjoy the conversation enough that we could do more. I want to talk about your books.
I'm enjoying it.
So you got your 2 books out. And I'll put up on screen again. These will be linked down below. So I encourage people, if they want to support what you're doing, they can get these books directly. You'll find a link for One Mind at a Time, A Deep State of Illusion, directly over on ForbiddenTruthAcademy.com. You can find it in the media section. Click on literature, and it'll take you to that section. With that being said, you got the 2 books out, which we discussed. I heard you talk about on that interview with Michael Knowles that you're going to be doing writing an autobiography. Do you have, and then I think you mentioned that this book, Will and Power, is part of a series. What's going on with the autobiography, and what's going on with other future books?
Well, the autobiography is slow coming. I'm more so focusing on the campaign. I'm more so focusing on saving the country rather than telling my story. I believe that saving the country, saving humanity, and saving the 7th generation and the planet, it takes precedent over anything personal on my behalf. I really am not all that worried about it. I've got it all up here, and I've got a lot of it already written down as it is. So when I need to take that back up, I will. Regarding Will and Power Part 2, that book's pretty much already been written. I just have to go through it and edit it a little bit more and read over it, and then send it to an editor or send it to somebody that is going to act as a grammatical, chief of sorts. Because I'm good, but I'm not good enough to find all my own mistakes. So that's all that's waiting for. I really do look forward to writing that fictional series. The thing is that it's a way of telling truth through fiction. Oh yeah, and that's the Rumble page, Forbidden Truth Podcast. And I also have another Rumble page, Yellowstone Wolf AZ, all one word, Yellowstone Wolf AZ.
I'll find a link for it and put it in the video description.
Yeah, that one's my personal Rumble account that was not taken down after January 6th. So there's some old videos on there. What's that?
It's probably because of the name Yellowstone Wolf, which they actually did reference in this Wikipedia article, but because it wasn't your actual name or anything attached with the QAnon or Q Shaman or Jake
what's
or
interesting
Jake Angeli.
What's interesting, though, is that there were videos that Rumble did take down from that particular channel. They just didn't take down the whole channel, which I thought was rather interesting. I don't care. I'm just glad to hear that it's still up. You know what I mean? But there's all sorts of good stuff on Forbidden Truth Podcast on the Rumble page there, and also on my my Yellowstone Wolf AZ Rumble account. Oh yeah, and then there's also the Occult Apocalypse show. That's a show that I co-host with another dude named Dave. That one is really good too. We've got I think it's at this point 4 episodes that are up, each of which runs about an hour and a half to 2 hours, maybe a little bit over. And it is What's that?
Sorry. Are they linked to your website? Those podcasts?
No, because it's something totally different.
Is it on Rumble?
Yeah, it's on Rumble. Just look up the Occult Apocalypse show.
Occult Apocalypse. Okay.
Yeah, the Occult Apocalypse show.
I can't type apparently, but I got it from the notes of us talking, so I'll make sure I get that looked up and pulled up. So what is this podcast specifically, the Forbidden Truth podcast? Is this like a team, you with other people?
Well, it was. Largely, it's going to be mostly me from now on. The 2 people that were helping me with it had to bow out for their own reasons. But there's ones that, are from the prison. When I was in prison, the guy was just recording the conversation. The guy there on the left in that photo right there, he was recording the conversations. The left on the screen. The guy that's got the mic by his mouth and the sunglasses on.
Right here.
He was recording the conversations. Yeah, he was recording the conversations I was having with him in prison. And then he was bringing all the conversations together and then turning it into a podcast. That's what the prison tapes are. And then that one right there, that asset, the Live at the Ley Lines, that one was the first podcast I did after I got out of prison.
Okay. What day did you actually get out? Was it end of May or was it beginning of June?
25th of May.
So that was almost a month after you got out. That's cool. It's good that you didn't allow that kind of stuff to kind of keep you down, and you just kept, once you got out, you just kept going with what you were doing, which I definitely appreciate.
Dude, I'm on a mission from God, bro. This is a divine mission. It is a divine task that I have been given, and I'm though I may walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. I'm not going to be deterred from saving the planet, humanity, the country, and the 7th generation. And the battle is a war for the mind. And so it's about changing people's minds. It's about giving them access to real information. It's about giving them access to good education. And then from there, our minds will be free. And from there, we can no longer have our bodies enslaved.
Do you plan on having a website for your run for Congress?
Yes, we're working on it now. Absolutely.
Okay. I figured I would mention that because if people want to be able to support what you're doing, a website and a central basis for the Congress thing would probably be a good idea. And I'm sure that you will announce it and have it linked on your Twitter/X account, which will be linked down below for people to check out so that they can follow about what's going on. Because I think that's important.
Yes. Well, and this is the other thing, because I'm not garnering any campaign funds or donations, if people want to support me, if they want to help put food in my belly while I speak for the American people, they can just buy my book, buy some of my merchandise. If they really just want to give donations, they can, to me personally, to help put food on the table, they can go to my Give, Send, Go at GiveSendGo/FreeJake.
The Chewbacca shirt had me cracking up, man.
Isn't that hilarious?
I was like, that is just one of the best shirts in the world. This one popping up right here so people know I'm talking about it. I was looking at the website when I was doing some research last night, and I saw this, and I was like, this is just classic. I'm surprised nobody ever called you Chewbacca.
Oh, they did. Tucker Carlson called me Chewbacca.
Okay. That's just hilarious, man. Well, I mean, you're an interesting guy, man. You've definitely have answered a lot of things that I was curious about. I mean, like I said, I do have a plethora of other questions that I would like to get to. There's so much, man. Like when you had mentioned during the Michael Knowles interview, which was I'm referencing a lot because it was a 2-hour interview and it was very in depth and covered a lot of really good information. And one of the things I was trying to look at the notes that you had talked about was the history of like where all this began, all this fuckery on our planet. I don't know if that's good for a YouTube video, being how the YouTube overlords and algorithm is, and how we are losing our right to free speech, and have to be choicey about those things. But I definitely want to get into the idea of what's taken place throughout our history from the Canaanite time period, fast forwarding through Sumeria, Babylon, Egypt, Persia, Greece, Rome, America, money magic, slavery, sacrifice. I want to dig into those things. I like your idea of not wanting to destroy the system, that you want to make the old system obsolete by creating a new one. That's something I would really like to explore more with you. It's basically another way of putting it is new solutions to old problems. Yes, and I think that the two of us coming together in some fashion, whether talking more on a regular basis or working together in some capacity, would be really interesting. And then based off the things that you have said in regards to the money magic, the slavery and sacrifice, there's plenty of things that I would like to kind of get into you with in regards to a word that you like to use, which is straw man. Because I do study the legal fiction and law versus legal, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that in a future episode. I think that this is a lot for people to digest. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. I'll have links down below for everything that we talked about. But before we wrap up, my friend, this conversation, do you have any final thoughts, anything that you want to add? The stage is all yours for the time, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to do an interview. I'm more than happy to come back and expand on things. Maybe we can expand on this notion of not using our energy to fight the old system, but using our energy to build a new system. When I finally have my website up, which should happen probably by the end of this week, my Congressional bid website, my campaign website, and then we can really talk about how we change the system, and we can really get in depth. And how it relates to history, how it relates to the historical roots of slavery regarding the monetary systems, which are based on false value systems. It's convincing people that the gold coin in my hand is more valuable than the fish in yours, even though you can't eat the gold. You know, that's money magic. It's like black magic.
Or making people think that the dollar is more valuable than the gold, because I've seen a lot of things.
Or that's another level
where people have gone out, like even like an ounce of silver or $20 or even $10, where the ounce of silver is double the value of that $10, and offer people, or an ounce of silver in a chocolate candy bar. And most people do not want the silver, don't want the actual monetary metal that would be defined as money and not currency.
Right.
So yeah, I think we could definitely
there's
have
a whole list of
things
we can cover, and I would like to. And I think that it would be great to have another conversation, one where we can, dive into these deeper questions about our history, about the system, about the deep state, how it works, why it works the way that it does, what it's trying to do, how it's a part of a much larger global apparatus, how we can, as the American people, make a difference, and shall we say, disassemble the tightly knit, highly efficient machine that's destroying the planet, that's enslaving the people, monopolizing resources and labor, and how it is that, seriously, dude, within a couple of months to a couple of years, we could turn this planet from a dystopia into an Eden, filled with abundance, filled with peace, filled with love and harmony, filled with full bellies, filled with animals that were on the brink of extinction, filled with clean water supplies, clean air to breathe, clean soil to plant in, one that we can hand over to our children and not have to worry about where it is that their future is headed.
Well said. Well said. And I'm definitely looking forward to having more conversations together. And I'll have links down below for everything that we talked about, and for people to stay tuned on what's going on. I would encourage people to follow you over on the X Twitters at American Shaman. Again, this will be linked down, or excuse me, America Shaman. And I'll have this link down below in the video description, along with everything else. If you could bear with me 1 second, Jake, I'm just going to do the wrap up. And ladies and gentlemen, I do greatly appreciate you guys tuning in for today's conversation. Again, as always, everything will be linked down below in the video description. Make sure you're subscribed here at Rice Crypto and my other channel, Rice Against the Grain, because this video will be going up on both channels. And make sure you're signing up for my mailing list over at my website, ricetvx.com. And if you would like to join me on the private side, replacing Patreon, I have riceuncensored.com. Before we wrap things up, I want to encourage you, as always, to be a blessing to others. Treat people how you want to be treated. Be the glitch that you want to see in this matrix. Be the change that you want to see in the world. And until next time, practice change.
Don't forget to visit ricetvx.com, where you can watch both of my YouTube channels, Rice Crypto and Rice Against the Grain, directly. Find all of my social media links, sign up for my mailing list, and become a member of Rice Uncensored, where you can join me on the private side for less than $0.25 a day. You will get early access to both Rice Crypto and Rice Against the Grain, ad-free, unedited videos, exclusive content, members-only forum with direct access to me, live streams, and more to come, only at ricetvx.com.